Hello and welcome to Talking Leadership. This is Eric Perez welcoming you back to what is a fantastic series of leadership discussions with, of course, leaders from across the spectrum in Australia. And today on a sunny Brisbane day and a sunny day in Victoria, have got the pleasure of being joined by a member of the Victorian seafood industry. And I'll just give you a bit of his background. So he's currently the chairman of the Jack and Albert River Restoration Committee. He is a director of Seafood Industry Victoria, which is the peak seafood body in that state, and is currently the managing director of the Port Albert Wharf Proprietary Limited. Can I welcome to the show, Michael Hobson, mate? How are you going?
Very well, Eric. It's a pleasure to be on.
Mate, it's great to have you on board. Look, Michael, we both work in the seafood industry, so I'm sure we're going to have some very, very colourful discussions around this thing called leadership from this industry's perspective. And I am very proud to say that I work in the commercial seafood industry in Queensland.
And so you should, Eric. So you should. Everyone who works in the industry should be incredibly proud of what they do.
Yeah, no, it's a great place to work. So, look, I'll start the podcast questions off with the question I always ask is, in which industry were you first, did you first take on a leadership role, and why, Michael?
I had little choice for that to be anything but the seafood industry, Eric, because I'm a fifth generation fisherman. So my dad, his dad, my mum, her father, his father. It's one of those things. So I was essentially born into the seafood industry, Eric. So that's always been fundamental to my existence, the industry. So one of the first leadership roles I think I had was back when I was a shark fisherman in the southern shark fishery back in the 90s, and I was the treasurer of the Southern Shark Industry Council. And on the Southern Shark and Gillnet Fishermen's Association as well. So, that was from when I was in my 20s.
Okay, and that just to unpack that a little bit, Michael. So, did you take on the treasurer's role? You got tapped on the shoulder. You wanted to do it. Was it
I was one of those rare beasts, Eric, that was a young guy in the industry. At that point, the Commonwealth had frozen transferability of licences in the industry, and they had for quite some time. I was in the fortunate position that I could purchase my licence through my dad through a grandfathering provision. So most of the guys in the fishery or in the industry at that stage were 20 years older than I was, and I was this young guy. So my priorities and my interest in the industry were perhaps a little bit different than someone who was probably at the end of their career, me being at the beginning of my career. But because most fisheries, it was a generational fishery. So there was a lot of empathy for how I felt about things, but there was also a lot of people who were quite despondent, didn't want to see their families continue in the industry because of the difficulties and the frustration that certain proposed management arrangements were facing. So it was an interesting space to be in, especially for a guy in his 20s.
So it's in your blood, yeah. And so look, offline and the overview of your career doesn't do that justice. I know you've done other roles. So in that context, because I know you've done lots of things in a career. And so can I ask you, in your travels, have you found a difference between the management and leadership function in the organisations you've worked with, and including your own business?
Sure. Leadership's an attitude. Management is a function. So you don't have to be the boss to display leadership. Leadership comes... I see leadership in my kids. I see leadership in my 7-year-old, my 4-year-old, and my 2-year-old. I see those things. When someone's demonstrating the qualities that resonate with us, that doesn't have to come from someone who's old or someone who's in a position of power necessarily. That can come from anyone. And management, well, there's different kinds of management. There's self-management, which I would argue is more critical than any other kind of management. That's where you need to show, if you want to achieve something, you need to show an incredible amount of discipline. You need to work hard. You need to be focused. You need to be aware of your surroundings. So, so there's differences in that respect, and I think in how we perceive what leadership and management is.
Mate, that's an interesting way to put those things, particularly about leadership being an attitude, and you don't have to have what they call in the literature, position power to be able to demonstrate that you've got.
No, yeah, I see it when I go to the kindergarten every day when I go to drop off or pick up my kids.
Yep.
I see leadership being displayed by those kids where they might not have the educators necessarily involved, but there's kids in there that are leaders.
Yeah, okay, and that's true, and you see that I've got two high school age boys, and you see that amongst themselves in their groups, and they do that quite. I don't think quite deliberately. It's just a function of being in a social setting. So I just want to engage you on another aspect of this. So, in your travels as a leader, so you personally, not others. There's this idea about leaders making mistakes. When you have made a mistake or an error of judgment in your travels as a leader, how do you deal with that?
Quickly.
Okay.
Quickly. Identify it really quickly. And sometimes, this stuff's life and death. I'll give you an example. I'm the captain of our local fire brigade as well. So there's not time if you make a mistake to fudge it and hope it's going to be okay. You've got to recognise it and deal with it. And you need to draw on the people around you to help you do that as well. So, and you know what? Leadership's a lot about honesty, a hell of a lot about honesty, because you need to have people trust you, and you need to trust people for that to happen. And if people can see sometimes mistakes are obvious, sometimes they're not. But if a mistake's obvious and you're trying to forge ahead as though it wasn't a mistake and you've made that decision and you're going to be bound by it, you can end up in a lot of trouble. You have to do that dynamic risk assessment where you are continually reviewing what's going on. You may have made a call because not all the information was available to you, but you had to make a call. But once that information does become available to you, you need to be able to bring that into what you're doing in your decision-making process. So I would say recognizing stuff really, really quickly. And So
before you go, and I won't let the podcast end before I ask this, because I need to unpack something here. And you brought something up that hasn't been brought up before in terms of the context in which leadership occurs. You said you're part of the fire brigade in your community. When you've got a crisis situation on, do you, from your experience, I'm trying to think of a way to ask this because this hasn't come up before, but in that context, when there's a crisis situation and you've got to be quickly responding, do you think that draws out leadership qualities in people that aren't necessarily there, but for a crisis having been in effect?
Sure, and I've been really lucky that I've been surrounded by people with infinitely more experience in those situations than I have. Like I've been in the CFA for 20 years, but I've been mentored by guys that have been in there for 50 years. So watching how they react, watching how they deal with things has been crucial, because that's helped influence me. And I'm hoping that influences the younger guys in the brigade, that, you don't fly into a panic. You analyse the situation. You be very clear about what you're doing. You're making sure that no one's going into danger, even though you've got a job to do, and you're constantly going through that process. So, I think that's something that is and can be passed down. I think some people are more receptive to it than others, but if you put people in an environment where that's the standard and that's the expectation, then they will do that.
Yeah, it's that crisis management context is, will vary from situation to situation, but and that's a very nice segue into the next question about what do you find is the most difficult part of being a leader? So in any of the contexts that you've worked in, what are you finding in your
I think in the past I've made the mistake of me looking at a situation and thinking that I've found the answer, and then I need to convince everyone else that that's the way forward. And I think that's a mistake. And that's something that you learn as you get a few more grey hairs on your head, I guess.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. So moving away from a negative more to a positive, how do you measure success, mate?
Well, there's lots of ways of measuring success. I think the health and the happiness of the people around you is probably one of the best measures, because at the end of the day, that's what's most important. And so, you know, you can measure it by whatever metric you want to. It's about the metrics that's important to you, and for me, my community and my industry. You know, how are they doing? Are they in a better position or a worse position? That's how I measure success.
Yeah, look, with and I want to unpack that a little bit more. So, do you, as a participant in the fishing industry in Victoria, is there a strong couple of questions here? So, a stronger sense of place than you might get if you're not living in rural or regional communities, and does that, in your travels, do you think that's affected the way that you've thought about and acted out leadership in your travels? That because of the kind of community you grew up in and the community that you're in now,
I think because I've grown up. Because I've grown up in small communities, you can't be anonymous. You know, the approach that you take to life is on display for everyone to see, and everyone's your critic. So I think that helps shape you because there's nowhere to hide. You know. What you are and what you do is what there is, but it also gives you an incredible sense of you have to protect that community as well. I mean, because it's such an important thing. It's what raises you and shapes you, and you need to defend that because, you know, to me, my community is like my family. They're one in the same thing.
It's an interesting topic area, mate, and I've got 1,000 questions come to mind around that link to community, because look, I've had some podcast guests that have talked about, or at least alluded to, this thing about closeness of place and closeness of community, and it's of interest to me because I'm one of those millions of Aussies that hasn't grown up in rural and regional or coastal Australia, but grown up in a Brisbane being the major metropolis that it is. I've grown up in Brisbane, so you get a different sense of the world. And when you get a chance to go out west or go into the Gulf, and I've had the privilege of going to the Gulf once in my life, you learn something, you know. I
think everyone seeks it. Everyone yearns for it. We're social creatures, mate. We can't. It's not something that we have a choice about. We want to connect with people.
It's palpable, though, and this is the thing. What I was trying to get at before is that when you go into those communities and you meet people like yourself that are so entrenched in the community, that it is a different world. And my question again, to follow up the last one, is: do you think it produces a different type of leader, or just increases your toolkit of what the things you're available to do, because you're not anonymous? You've got to be, from what I'm hearing, saying, I think, more accountable for what you do.
Sure. I think what makes good leaders is the same as what makes good people, is the diversity of experience and being able to, live in that small community. But of course, I went and studied in Melbourne, you know, and I've been fortunate enough to be able to travel quite extensively around the world. And I think all of those things give you perspective, you know, like being, you know, whether you're dealing with the wealthiest people in the world or the poorest people in the world, the biggest metropolises in the world, the smallest communities in the world. It's all about perspective, Eric. And I think that's the crucial thing. Having an understanding and an appreciation for where people are coming from is fundamental to being a good leader. I mean, you can't be a good leader unless you have empathy. You have to be able to have empathy with people in the situation they're in. if you're going to help.
Yeah, okay. I was just going to say, look, Melbourne's a nice city, but you got to come up to Brisbane, mate. Brisbane's where the action's at, mate.
I actually spent a bit of time in Brisbane in 2005, 4 or 5, I think it was. We did a complete refit on a yacht. It was Billy Connolly's yacht, and we had it in the shipyard there. Just what was the name of that shipyard? Just down from the Gateway Bridge, the Brisbane Marine Industrial Park there.
Oh,
yeah, so I
okay,
spent a bit of time there, mate. It's a great place.
Oh, it is. It truly is. All right, so I've got a couple of statements here that I'd like to run by you and to get your initial reaction to some of these. So the first one is, again, from your experience, on-the-job experience develops better leaders.
Sure. I think it's, it goes to that point that I was making before about having an understanding of your industry, of your people, of all that kind of stuff. I think you have to at some stage walk in the shoes of the people that you're representing and the people that you're advocating on behalf of. And I think that's where we've probably run into difficulties in the past in the sphere of fisheries management. I guess that's one of those areas that comes to mind early, because I don't think that those people have always walked in the shoes of those people that they're trying to manage. And I think that's problematic. And I think for you to be an effective, we're talking about the distinction between management and leadership. I think if those people had spent some time actually understanding what they're managing, we'd be in a hell of a different situation with that stuff. When you talk about, we'll go back to the guts of that question again, Eric, because I did have a thought that I dropped.
No, that's okay. So the question was, or the statement was, on-the-job experience develops better leaders.
Yeah, look, the more experience and the more stuff that you can pack in to draw upon to be able to deal with any given situation is going to help you, mate. That's a no-brainer. So
yeah. So for the benefit of the podcast listeners, when Michael was talking about fisheries management, he's talking about the bureaucrats that work in any given department of fisheries that look after or regulate and manage our commercial fisheries. Just for those that don't have the seafood lingo.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. That's okay. And look, everyone has their jargon, Michael, and I'm guilty of it. In the first couple of podcasts, you drop.
Very perceptive to pick up on it, Eric.
No, you're right. You drop what you know, and sometimes when you use acronyms, people are like, oh yeah, what does that mean? And we speak a very different language, mate. But that's all right. So the next statement here, mate, is formal education helps to develop better leaders.
Look, formal education has its place. It can make you polished. If you want to be able to deliver, it teaches you certain things. I'm not going to lie about this. I can say, oh no, it doesn't make any difference. A formal education can teach you certain things about how to deliver a message, how to connect with people, things like that. There's aspects of that that's inbuilt into a lot of those institutions when it comes to how you present yourself and how you present an idea. I'm not going to lie. What it won't give you is any of the passion that you need to do what you need to do. And, that's where being in the field and being a part of what you're doing is crucial. You've got to have that, because without that, you don't have any fire in your belly. And you've got to have a fire in your belly.
Sure. So if I unpack that a bit, if you're driven and have passion for what you do, you can still be
you'll find a way
leader without having that bit of paper to say, hey, I've done X, Y, Z. Okay, yeah, sure. All right, so here's the last one, and I'm extremely interested to hear your response to this, because I'm a fence sitter on this one myself, but that's not neither here nor there. Leaders are born, not made.
Well, I mean, there's plenty of examples where you can point to both of those. I think it's up to us to create our own leaders. We have to do that. So in a sense, I think, leaders are made. Because if you're not creating the leaders, you're not going to have, a sustainable future. You've got to have a society that can create those leaders. As far as leaders being born, sure, there's history's full of examples where leaders are actually inherit stuff through just the mere fact that they've been born to certain parents, and that's just been the way of things. So if you want to look at the most truly democratic way, leaders have to be made, but there's always going to be those individuals that are just exceptions, whether they're elite sports people or they're fantastic leaders. I don't know, something's happening in that DNA there somewhere, mate, or their life experience somewhere where they find a calling and they find a way of being able to unite people and they become great leaders. So sure, I can find plenty of examples of both. I think having opportunity perhaps is important, and that's for us to provide to people. There's plenty of people with potential that probably may not have been given the opportunity to be great leaders. So it's crucial for us to give everyone that opportunity to be able to do that. So yeah, there's plenty of examples of both, but I think there's probably a weird combination in there somewhere that just makes those freakish ones every now and again that we all.
and I think we've all met that person in our travels in different.
I've met a few. I've been lucky.
Same, and I've had the good fortune to be mentored by some people that they leave you thinking, well, how did you get to that point, or how did you come to that way of thinking? And I think experience plays a little part in that. But that said, sometimes you get some people that have that X factor and will be able to draw on those tools and just get the job done when they need to.
Yeah.
It's incredibly interesting.
When probably 99% of the population couldn't do that.
Correct. So, and this is a bit of the podcast where I get to ask some questions around just your thoughts. I'm not asking for whether you agree or disagree with me, but just your perspective on a couple of things. So in the studies that I'm undertaking at the moment, I'm looking at strategic thinking and foresight being some of the core critical leadership skills for our agriculture leaders into the future. And I just wanted to get your perspective on those two, because in the time that we've been chatting here, I get the sense that you've got some very broad views about what leadership is, and particularly around what those capabilities are. And so in addition to what you said, what are your views on strategic thinking and foresight as part of that toolkit of being an effective leader?
The most important thing is to have that empathy. I don't know if that's something that we've recorded already, but I think you have to be prepared to look after the most unfortunate people in your community. If you're only interested in looking in the ones that are going to be easy to look after, or the ones that are you can then that's to me a bit of a cop out. I think to be an effective leader, you need to be able to look after the most vulnerable, and to me that is the most important thing. If you're looking after the most vulnerable, everyone else is going to do okay. Okay,
and that's and again, I knew this was going to be a good chat, because there's something there that I don't think has been mentioned in the podcast to date. So I'll with your okay, I'd like to ask a couple of questions. So
sure.
I think what you're alluding to there is a community service, whatever that looks like in the community. So in your context, you've mentioned working for the local fire brigade, and do you do other things? And why I ask this is that, this is where I can share some of my background with the listeners, is I was not the greatest strategic thinker in my youth coming up, and I was a shit of a kid coming up. I could have been a lot better to my parents, and I was thinking about me. And so when you
that's all of us, mate. That's all of us.
I can see that, but I can admit quite freely that I wasn't the best of kids and could have been a lot better and kinder to my parents. But beyond that stuff, as you grow up, you hit a point where you want to do something to help others without necessarily getting something back. And do you think in your travels that has made you a more well-rounded leader, let alone human being?
Yeah, of course. You do at some stage in your life actually question what it's all about, you know. And to me, the moment came when it was the first time I'd started working in the super yacht industry, and we'd taken this $30 million yacht that's, you know, back then it was built in the late 90s. $30 million is a lot of money now. It was a hell of a lot of money then.
Yeah.
And we sailed that up to Papua New Guinea, and we were waiting for the boss. So here I was on shore with the flash tender, just come off this spaceship of a yacht that, and here I was in probably some of the poorest, you know, it was the kids were all flocking around this boat, you know, out of this village, and I could see those kids had no hope of ever having any decent medical care. They had no hope of ever receiving any educational advantage, and being able to lift themselves out of the poverty that they are in. Don't get me wrong, they were still pretty happy. They were happy in the environment they were in, but that was the juxtaposition. And here I am waiting for a boss to fly on his $35 million jet, to jump on his $30 million yacht to go and I'm thinking, well, this is the world. This is the world. This is where we're at. You know, we're stuck between these two worlds. So for me, that was one of those defining moments in your life where you say, well, what is it all about? You know, just what is it all about? What, you know, is it about money? What is it about? You know, so I guess that's probably one of those instances that's helped shape how I approach things. So from that point on, I probably approach things a little bit differently, you know. And I thought, well, maybe it's not all about me. Maybe it's about, you know, us as a community. Maybe it's about us as a whatever community you want that to be, whether it's your local fishing village like where I live, or it's our community as a world.
Yeah, no, that we all hit that moment where the sort of the light bulb goes off, and you try and sort of make sense of what you're doing. Because I think, and I can say this now with the 20 odd discussions that I've had, is that the bit that hasn't been discussed as well as it's been discussed here, and I'm grateful for your candor on this, is that I think part of the non-work part of your life helps to inform how you do leadership. And you've brought up empathy a number of times, and I think it's been brought up before where people call it being your genuine self, being true to who you are. And I think empathy is probably the best way to capture that, because if you can't put yourself in the position of others, then how do you expect others to follow you as a leader and share whatever vision you've got for your organization?
Being a leader is not about having people follow you, mate.
Yeah. Okay, all right. So
you'll never be a good leader if you just want people to follow you, mate.
Yeah, okay. So I'll correct my statement there, because that's not what I meant. I mean,
no, I know.
You've got to show an example, and if you're not prepared to get in and do it yourself, and as it's been put to me, get your hands dirty and be seen to be exactly. living what you're trying to do, then people just won't engage. Has that? So in and going back to that question a bit, owning. This is what I forgot to ask before about owning mistakes or owning things and rectifying that. Have you had a time in your career when it's just gone to, I'm sorry for the use of the word, but to shit? And how did you pick yourself up? If you can you give me an example when maybe you've got, oh wow, I've got to do something, where you've turned 360 and done something completely different?
Yeah, sure.
That is PG that we can put on the podcast. Nothing to.
Oh, look, there's plenty of examples of, you know, perilous situations I've found myself in through either being over enthusiastic about my abilities and the abilities of things around me, or
right.
or do you want to get into more like situations that were well beyond my control with what I could do? And yeah, I've had the blow up and say, well, you can stick the whole thing, I'm out of here. You know,
Well, okay. So I'll probably go for the example where maybe you've underestimated your capabilities,
and I think, look, I think that just comes with being, you know, the exuberance of youth, I guess. That's one of those things, and that's what tests us. But yeah, look, I've probably, when I was shark fishing in Bass Strait, it's a pretty ordinary stretch of water, and I remember being, you know, like having that extra shot. You know, I knew the weather was going to come away, but, you know, we'd been working all week with bugger all, and I just started to find fish and a patch of fish, and I was like, well, no, I'm going to have another shot and wear the consequences for that. And there's a pretty notorious part of Bass Strait called Bank Strait, which is between Flinders Island and Tasmania. And, mate, do they stand on their ends down there when it gets angry and you get wind against tide? So, yeah, sure. I remember having a few crew look at me with very pale faces as we're punching away and probably not making a lot of headway, and I'm thinking, geez, I hope they don't get much bigger and much steeper.
Yeah, wow, okay. And that's I'll chalk that up definitely to youthful exuberance, because you think you can take on the world, and unfortunately sometimes the world delivers.
Well, and truly, Mother Nature lets you know when you've overstepped the boundaries, mate. She's pretty good at doing that.
Yeah, and I've had enough stories up this part of the world to fully agree with you on that. So look, Michael, the last question I've got here is around doing a bit of looking back, so sort of hindcasting a little bit. So what would you say to a younger version of yourself about being an effective leader?
Oh, look, there's been so many things I've found out, and I think you're meant to find out things at a time in your life when you're meant to find them out, Eric.
Yep.
You know, I think you've got to be a little bit philosophical about that stuff. I think you've got to have tough situations to go through and learn from them, rather than just someone handing you the knowledge, whether that's an older version of yourself or someone else. I've been lucky enough to receive some great pearls from, you know, I was very close to my grandparents growing up, and they were amazing as far as being able to instill some of that, you know, well, what I call innate knowledge. It's knowledge that's kind of, that I see as generational. It's important. My parents as well, and other people through my life. So, look, you know, I could tell a younger version of myself all this stuff I know now, but it wouldn't have got me to where I am now if I'd known that stuff earlier, and I probably wouldn't have understood it as well or appreciated it. You got to kind of figure some stuff out for yourself.
All right, now that's cool, and this is probably the most different way that question's been answered. I've had a few that have gone, look, you need to live some life to get experience, to be able to develop some wisdom, and yeah, okay, now I can see where you're coming from with that, and I appreciate your candor on that. So look, so for the listeners, this has been Talking Leadership. I've been talking to Michael Hobson. Michael, I appreciate your time today, mate.
Been a pleasure, Eric. Always great to have a chat, mate.
No worries. And so for the listeners, thank you for joining us today for the podcast. And as always, I will catch you on the next one. See you, mate.
Cheers, Eric.